Michael and Linda had been married for over 35 years. Their love had once been passionate, filled with laughter, deep conversations, and stolen kisses. They had built a life together, raising children, facing struggles, and celebrating victories. But now, in their 60s, something had changed. Linda sat in the living room, watching Michael as he sat on the couch, his eyes glued to the television. The glow of the screen reflected on his face, making him look distant, almost like a stranger. He hardly spoke to her anymore. Their conversations had become routine, short, dull exchanges about grocery lists, bills, or family updates. There was no warmth, no playfulness, no affection. She glanced at the clock. It was already past 9. Years ago, this would have been the time when Michael would pull her close, whispering about their future, about his dreams. But those days were long gone. Now he barely even noticed when she entered the room. Linda sighed, adjusting her robe. She had always imagined that growing old together would be different. She had pictured evenings spent reminiscing about their youth, laughing over old memories, and maybe even dancing in their living room. But instead they lived in silence, trapped in a routine that no longer felt like love. Michael scrolled through his phone, his fingers tapping on the screen. Linda felt invisible. She wanted to say something, to ask him what had happened, why he had changed. But a part of her was scared. What if he told her the truth, that he no longer loved her? Still, she couldn't hold it in any longer. "Michael," she said softly, breaking the silence. He barely looked up. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Do you still love me?" Michael finally turned to her, his expression confused. "Of course I do." But his voice lacked emotion. It was a simple answer, given out of obligation rather than feeling. Linda's heart sank. She had hoped for more, for reassurance, for passion, for something that showed he still cared. But instead, he turned back to his phone, as if the conversation had never happened. She swallowed hard. Maybe she was overthinking. Maybe this was normal. After all, they had been married for decades. Wasn't it natural for love to fade, for excitement to disappear? But deep down, she knew this wasn't just a phase. It was something more. Linda thought about the way Michael used to be. He used to kiss her forehead every morning before leaving for work. He used to call her just to hear her voice. He used to bring her flowers for no reason. Now, he barely noticed when she walked into the room. She missed him. Not just as her husband, but as her best friend. As she sat there, watching him lost in his own world, she wondered, was this how all marriages ended? In quiet loneliness, with two people living under the same roof but feeling miles apart? Linda felt a lump in her throat but forced herself to stay calm. She wouldn't cry, not now. Instead, she turned away, pretending to be interested in the book on the table. But the words blurred together, and all she could think about was how love, once so bright, had dimmed into nothing more than silence. Linda stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. The woman who looked back at her wasn't the same woman from years ago. She saw the fine lines around her eyes, the gray streaks in her hair, and the softness that had replaced the firmness of her youth. Her body had changed with time, and no matter how much she tried to accept it, she couldn't help but wonder, was this why Michael had lost interest? She turned slightly, adjusting the robe around her shoulders. She still remembered the days when Michael's eyes would light up whenever he saw her, when he would hold her close and whisper about how beautiful she was. But now he barely noticed her. He barely touched her. It had been months, no years since he had last complimented her. A deep sigh escaped her lips as she thought about the way things used to be. She and Michael had been inseparable in their younger years. They used to talk for hours, share secrets, and dream about growing old together. Back then, love felt effortless, natural, something that didn't need to be questioned. But now, after decades of marriage, it felt as though they were nothing more than roommates, living under the same roof but in different worlds. Linda walked to the dresser and picked up their wedding photo. In the picture, Michael had his arm around her, his smile wide and full of love. She looked at herself. Her eyes were bright, her face glowing with happiness. She had never once doubted that they would last forever. But forever felt so different now. She started thinking about all the little things she had ignored over the years. The way Michael would get lost in his phone instead of talking to her. The way he would forget small things, her favorite flowers, her favorite songs. He used to ask about her day, used to listen. Now he simply nodded, distracted, uninterested. And then there were the moments that hurt the most. Their anniversary had passed 2 weeks ago, and Michael had barely acknowledged it. Linda had waited all day, hoping for some kind of surprise, maybe a dinner, maybe just a heartfelt card. But all she got was a casual happy anniversary in the morning, and then he went on with his day as if it didn't matter. She didn't say anything, she didn't argue or complain, she just smiled and accepted it. But deep inside, she had felt something break. Was this how love faded? Not through fights or betrayal, but through indifference. Linda sat down on the edge of the bed, her hands resting on her lap. She thought about the years she had given to this marriage. She had dedicated herself to their home, their children, their life together. She had always put Michael first, always cared for his needs before her own. And now that the children were grown, now that the house was quiet, she realized something painful. She had forgotten about herself. For so many years she had defined herself as Michael's wife, as a mother. But who was she beyond that? A tear slipped down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away. She didn't want to cry, not anymore. Linda wasn't angry at Michael. She was hurt, yes, but more than that, she was disappointed. She had spent so many years making sure he was happy, making sure their family was taken care of, but who had taken care of her? She suddenly felt exhausted. Love wasn't supposed to feel this lonely. That night, as she lay beside Michael in bed, she turned her back to him. She listened to his slow, steady breathing, but she didn't feel comforted by his presence. Instead, she felt like a stranger sleeping next to another stranger. She closed her eyes, making a silent decision. Things couldn't go on like this. She couldn't live the rest of her life feeling invisible. Something had to change. The next afternoon, Linda decided to go out. She had spent too many days trapped in the house, drowning in loneliness. She needed fresh air, a change of scenery, anything to help clear her mind. She found herself at a small bookstore downtown, one she hadn't visited in years. It used to be her favorite place, back when she had time for herself. Before marriage, before children, before life became a routine of responsibilities. As she wandered through the aisles, running her fingers along the spines of books, she heard a warm voice behind her. "You look lost in thought." Linda turned to see a woman around her age, with silver hair styled elegantly and eyes filled with kindness. She wore a bright blue scarf and had an energy that was both graceful and confident. Linda smiled, just remembering how much I used to love this place. The woman extended her hand. "I'm Grace." Linda shook her hand. "Linda." Grace gestured toward the cafe inside the bookstore. "Care for some tea? You look like you could use a friend." Something about Grace's warmth made Linda say yes. They sat by the window, sipping tea, and soon, Linda found herself opening up about her marriage, about Michael's distance, about the aching loneliness she felt. Grace listened without judgment, nodding thoughtfully. Then she smiled, setting her cup down. "Let me tell you something, Linda. Men don't lose interest in their wives because they get older. They lose interest because their wives stop shining." Linda frowned. "What do you mean?" Grace leaned in. "When we're younger, we live for ourselves. We take care of our looks, our dreams, our passions. But then marriage happens, kids happen, life happens, and suddenly, we put ourselves last. We give everything to our families, thinking that's what love is. But in the process, we forget who we are." Linda sat in silence, absorbing Grace's words. She had never thought of it that way. Grace continued, "Men are drawn to women who love themselves. Not just physically, but emotionally. When you stop seeing yourself as interesting, so does he." Linda shifted in her chair. "So you think it's my fault?" Grace shook her head. "No, my dear. But if you want things to change, it starts with you." Linda stared down at her tea, reflecting on the past years. When was the last time she did something just for herself? When was the last time she laughed without holding back? When was the last time she felt beautiful, not for Michael, but for herself? Grace reached into her bag and handed Linda a small notepad. "Write down 3 things you love to do. Things that have nothing to do with Michael, nothing to do with anyone else. Just you." Linda hesitated, then took the pen. Slowly, she began to write. Reading novels, dancing in the living room, taking long walks in the evening. She looked at the list, realizing how long it had been since she'd done any of those things. Grace smiled. "Now do them." Linda let out a small laugh. "Just like that." "Just like that," Grace said. "Start living again, Linda. The moment you do, you'll see the difference, not just in Michael, but in yourself." That night, Linda sat in bed, holding the notepad. Michael lay beside her, scrolling through his phone as usual. But for the first time, she didn't feel sad about it. She had spent too long waiting for him to notice her, waiting for things to change. But maybe, just maybe, the change had to start with her. David had always known Anna to be the gentle, thoughtful woman he'd married. Her laughter, light and soft, had been the heartbeat of their home. But now something in her seemed different. The changes were subtle at first, a slight hesitation in her voice, a way her eyes lingered on the door before she left, as though she were looking for an escape. But David didn't know how to ask her about it. He didn't know if he was ready for the answer. One evening after dinner, Anna stood in front of the mirror, her fingers brushing the smooth surface of her necklace. David noticed the tension in her back. It wasn't the first time he'd seen it, but tonight it seemed more pronounced. He stepped closer, his heart beating faster. "Anna," he said softly, "is everything okay?" Anna glanced over her shoulder, a faint smile pulling at her lips, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm fine, just thinking." David hesitated, unsure of how to push, but he couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in his chest. There was something she wasn't saying. "You've been different lately." Her eyes flashed, the calmness in them replaced by something David hadn't seen before. Was it fear? Desire? He couldn't quite place it. "I've changed, David," Anna whispered, turning fully to face him. Her posture was different, more confident, more assured, as if she was a stranger standing in front of him. "I had to." David opened his mouth to speak, but words failed him. The woman he had known was slipping through his fingers, and in her place was someone unfamiliar, someone he wasn't sure he recognized. Her transformation was happening before his eyes, and he didn't know if he could stop it. Her voice softened as she took a step closer, her fingers grazing his chest. "You wouldn't understand, but I needed this change. I needed to feel alive again." David's mind raced, but his body remained still. What was she telling him? What had she done? He didn't know if he was ready for the answer, but he knew this was just the beginning. Something was about to unfold that would change everything between them. The days that followed Anna's confession felt like a slow unraveling. David couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing her, and the more he tried to hold on, the further she seemed to slip away. Her late nights, her distant glances, and the way she now spent hours staring at herself in the mirror. It all painted a picture that David didn't want to see. But no matter how hard he tried to deny it, the truth was clear. Anna had changed. It wasn't until a quiet Saturday evening that everything came crashing down. David had returned home early from work, hoping to surprise Anna. He expected the usual. Her smiling face greeting him at the door, the smell of her favorite dinner filling the air. But instead, the house was silent. No sounds of cooking, no laughter, nothing. He found her in the living room, standing by the window, staring out into the darkening sky. The glow from the streetlights cast soft shadows across her face, and for the first time in days, David noticed how tired she looked. There was a weariness to her, something he hadn't seen before. "Hannah?" His voice was tentative as he stepped closer. She turned, her lips curling into that same faint smile that had become all too familiar. "I didn't hear you come in." David couldn't stop himself now. The words he'd been holding back burst out. "What's happening, Anna? What's going on with you?" She looked away, her fingers trembling slightly as she twisted the ring on her finger. I don't know how to explain it. But I feel like I'm living someone else's life. I don't even recognize myself anymore, David." David's heart sank. He had always prided himself on being there for her, on knowing her better than anyone. But now he realized how little he truly understood what she was going through. His mind began to race, his thoughts tumbling over each other. Was it him? Had he somehow changed and left her to feel this way? "I've tried," Anna continued, her voice cracking slightly, "to be who I was before. But I can't anymore. There's a part of me that feels like I'm suffocating, like I need to be more. I need to find something, someone, that makes me feel alive again." The words cut through David like a knife. He had never imagined that she would feel this way. He had always believed that their marriage was strong, that their love was enough to weather any storm. But now he realized how wrong he had been. He had neglected her in ways he hadn't noticed, assuming that everything would stay the same without ever asking her if it was enough for her. "Anna," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "I never meant for you to feel like this. I don't know what I've missed, but I want to understand. Please, let me help you." She shook her head softly. "I don't know if you can, David. I've changed and I'm not sure who I'm becoming anymore. I just need to figure it out on my own." David's chest tightened. He knew he couldn't force her to stay, couldn't make her love him the way she once had. But he also knew he couldn't lose her without a fight. The realization hit him with the weight of 1,000 bricks. He wasn't just losing her physically, but emotionally too. And if he didn't change, if he didn't find a way to meet her where she was now, he might never get her back. "I won't give up on us, Anna. I'll do whatever it takes," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But even as the words left his mouth, he wondered if it was already too late. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty, the quiet tension between David and Anna palpable in every room of their house. They no longer shared the same kind of closeness they once had. Each conversation seemed to bring them further apart, yet David couldn't shake the feeling that something could be salvaged, if only he knew how to fix it. One evening, David sat alone in the living room, his mind racing with thoughts of Anna. He kept replaying their last conversation in his head, trying to pinpoint the exact moment when things had begun to fall apart. Had it been the long hours at work, the way he had become so consumed with his own life that he'd neglected hers? He stood up suddenly, the need to act overpowering any lingering doubts. He couldn't sit idly by and watch her slip away. He needed to show her that he still saw her. The woman he had fallen in love with, the woman who was still in there somewhere. The next day, David decided to do something unexpected. He knew Anna had always loved surprises, especially the small, meaningful ones that showed he was paying attention. He made plans. No more dull evenings at home, no more missed opportunities. He had to find a way to rekindle the fire, to remind her why they had fallen in love in the first place. That evening, as the sun began to set, David led Anna to the backyard. The air was crisp, the sky a deep shade of purple. Candles flickered softly along the garden path, and the scent of jasmine filled the air. A small table was set for two, with her favorite wine and a simple, elegant meal. Anna stood there for a moment, blinking in surprise. "David, what's all this?" David took her hands in his voice sincere. "I know I haven't been the husband I should have been, Anna. I've been caught up in my own world, and I never took the time to appreciate you the way I should have. But tonight, I want to show you that I still see you, that I still love you." A tear welled up in Anna's eye as she looked at him. "David, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he replied softly. "I just want to spend this evening with you, to remind you of the way things were before, to find us again." They sat down, the quiet clinking of their glasses and the soft rustling of the evening breeze creating a gentle backdrop to their conversation. As the night unfolded, they shared stories, laughter, and a deep connection that had been missing for too long. For the first time in weeks, Anna's smile felt genuine, and David could see the walls around her beginning to crumble. After dinner, they walked through the garden, their fingers brushing occasionally, the touch of it reminding them both of a simpler time in their relationship. Anna paused beside a fountain, the water gently cascading down the stone. "David," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I've missed this. I've missed us." David's heart swelled with hope. "I've missed it too. I don't want to lose you, Anna. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." She turned to face him, her eyes filled with a mix of love and vulnerability. "I know you will. But we both have to change, David. It's not just you. I need to find a balance too. I need to remember who I am, outside of being a wife." David nodded, understanding. "We'll find that balance together, one step at a time." They stood there in the quiet of the night, the weight of everything unsaid finally lifting between them. For the first time in a long time, it felt like the beginning of something new, something worth fighting for. As they embraced, the warmth of the moment filled the space between them, and David knew, deep in his heart, that this was the spark they had needed all along. A chance to rekindle the fire that had dimmed but never fully burned out, and this time he wasn't going to let it slip away again. The weeks that followed the night in the garden were a slow, steady rebuilding. David and Anna found new rhythms in their lives, carving out moments for each other amidst their busy routines. The distance between them shrank, not with grand gestures, but with the small, consistent acts of love that had once defined their relationship. They shared laughter again, and their conversations, once strained, now flowed with ease and understanding. David had learned to listen more carefully, to notice the subtle changes in Anna's mood, her quiet sighs, and the way her eyes lingered on him when she thought he wasn't looking. He knew she was still in the process of finding herself again, but each day felt like a step forward. Anna, too, had begun to let down her guard, to open up about her fears, her hopes, and the parts of her that had been buried for so long. They talked more, not just about their marriage, but about who they were individually, and how they could support each other's growth. One afternoon, as the sun cast a golden glow over their living room, Anna turned to David with a gentle smile. "I feel like I'm getting back to myself," she said softly, her voice filled with quiet satisfaction. "Like I'm not just his wife, but Anna again." David reached out, taking her hand in his. "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I'm proud of us. We've made it through something that could have torn us apart." Anna squeezed his hand, her smile widening. "We didn't just survive, David. We're stronger for it. We've learned more about each other, about who we are together and who we are apart." David looked at her, his eyes full of admiration. In the years they had been together, Anna had always been the heart of their home, the constant, steady force in his life, but now there was a newfound strength in her, a confidence he hadn't seen before. It was as if the woman he had fallen in love with had been reborn, not as someone else, but as a more complete version of herself. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sky turn from pink to purple, David took a deep breath. He didn't have the words for all that he felt, but the truth was clear. This love, this bond they shared, had never truly aged. It had weathered storms, been tested by time, and still it stood strong. In a world where everything seemed to fade with the passing years, their love had only deepened. "I know we've had our struggles," he said quietly, his voice a soft whisper in the evening air. "But I wouldn't change a thing. Because it brought us to this moment, and I don't want to spend another day without you, Anna." Anna leaned her head against his shoulder, her heart full. "Neither do I, David. You and I, we're forever." The stars began to twinkle above them, a quiet reminder that some things in life only grow more beautiful with time. The years ahead were unknown, filled with both challenges and joys, but as long as they had each other, David knew their love would never age. It would only grow deeper, more resilient, and more precious with each passing day. And so, in the stillness of the evening, surrounded by the quiet hum of the world, David and Anna sat together, knowing that their love was a fire that would never fade. It was a flame that would burn bright, no matter what life brought their way. Because love, true love, never ages, it only becomes more beautiful with time.